Okay, so you should have at each of your tables a micron pen for yourself, a roll of masking tape or two to share, and your sketchbook. Your micron pen should be a 05. You're going to take your masking tape and just do the trace and pass. So you need to trace the inside of it 5 times, so that way you have 5 circles. You can fit all 5 on one sketchbook page probably. If that makes you feel like it's crowded, you're more than welcome to put them on different pages, maybe 2 on one, 3 on another, whatever you want. It doesn't make a difference. When you're tracing out the inside of the masking tape, you don't need to press down hard. You can just have a nice light touch. The felt tip is pretty delicate, so if you naturally write heavy or draw heavier with a dark line, you just have to be conscientious of that. Careful not to like jam it down into the paper or anything, because it will hurt the tip and then the pen won't work as well anymore. So we have these 5 different circles. We're going to label them because we're doing 5 different ways of building up value. So we're just using different marks to essentially create a transition of value from dark to light. So if you look up on the board to the right of this movie, the example of the negative space drawing, those negative shapes go from dark to light. The outer edge is very dark, and then there's kind of like a vignette where it gets lighter in the middle. So we're going to do that inside of each of these 5 circles with different ways of building up the marks. So it's just a way to kind of understand how value works, and how different marks with your writing utensil, whether it's a pen, a marker, a paintbrush, the way that you can build up those individual marks to make it look darker. So we're going to label all 5 of these. That way you can see 4 different specific ones, and then the last one, you're going to choose what kind of mark you would like to do. So it's going to kind of be individual and unique to yourself. So the very first one, it's going to be labeled linear. So you would spell that Linear. And this is just kind of a straight line that we do. The next one is going to be called cross hatching. So it's CROSSHATCHING. And that's kind of 2 sets of marks that go across each other. The third one is called scumbling. SCUMBLING. It's kind of like a scribbling sort of technique. And then the fourth one is called stippling. STIPPLING. And then the very fifth one, because it's kind of your own design, your own choice, we're just going to write surprise, because you're going to be able to choose whatever you want. So surprise. So just in case you didn't get the spelling down, LANEAR, cross-hatching, scumbling, stippling, and then your surprise. Okay, so you're going to do these with me. I'll give you a little bit of time as I'm kind of working through each one, and then you'll take the rest of the time in class to finish these 5 circles out. So with linear, the very first one, it's a series of marks that are all going in the same exact direction. So whatever direction you make your first line, everything else is going to be parallel to that. So it's a set of lines that are all going in the exact same direction. They're going to be very dark on the edge, so more frequent, and then they'll kind of space themselves out as you get closer to the center. So I'm going to do a bunch of lines here on the edge. They're going to slowly kind of build up, and then as I work my way out towards the center, they're going to space out a little more. Again, I can't really control the darkness of my line because I'm using a pen. I don't need to press down hard. So here on these other edges, maybe I need to make my lines a little bit shorter, okay, because it still needs to be real dark on that edge, and it's going to transition lighter in the middle. But you can see they're all still going in the same exact direction. Okay, so that's the most important thing about linear, is that all of your lines are parallel. They're all going in one direction, and they just sort of build up. So the more frequent they are, again, the darker that edge is going to look. The more you space them out, the more white paper will be showing. So visually blending, it's going to look lighter. It's a lighter value. So if you haven't started this yet, pick up your pen, start making some of those marks, and see if you can get a transition from real dark on the edge, like the most extreme of a black edge, and it transitions out. So I just picked up my paper and held it out at arm's length, and I kind of squinted at it, which you might look funny if you do this, but I do it a lot, and I'm going to suggest you to do it a lot. And that lets you, if you squint at it, you can sort of see if you have a smooth transition between your dark to light, because you can sort of see the values, the darkness and lightness all kind of blend in together. Okay, so if you feel like you need to do that a couple times, feel free. And take the next 60 seconds or so and work inside of this circle and see if you can get a transition happening, a nice dark edge. Again, you'll have to go back in and continue to layer your lines. And you'll see it getting darker and darker. I pick up my pen after every line, so it's not like I'm just like constantly moving my pen back and forth. I'm really only making my lines when my hand moves upwards, and it's like these long or these short dashes, right? And that prevents me from getting too heavy-handed, too much of like a dark area, because if I do make one area too dark, then it's going to be hard to bounce back from that, especially because I'm using marker and I can't erase my marks. I can't take them away and lighten an area back up. Okay, so give a little bit more attention to those curved parts of the edges that aren't quite parallel with the direction of your lines. See if you can use short little dashes to blend those out. And you should have a transition kind of happening. Okay, I have a lighter center there. I'm going to help that blend out a little bit more. Okay, and a dark edge. All right, so now we're going to go to cross-hatching. Cross-hatching is, it's similar to linear, but rather than just using one line in one direction, we're using two lines, one in one direction and then one in another. So they kind of cross over each other in a perpendicular fashion. So I'm going to start the same way with all my lines, and then I'm going to go across them and kind of pull out. So you can see I'm going to go back and forth, going in one direction, then the other, then back to that initial direction, then the other. And this makes working, especially in curved edges, a little bit easier because I'm not fighting to make all those tiny little dashed marks to get those dark edges, because I can just use that other direction of my pen to create a darker edge. Okay, so you can see I just kind of pointed that out. So pick up your pen if you haven't already and see how this works out for you. See if you like it more or less than the linear. Sometimes it gives your area a little bit more of a volume. It looks a little bit more three-dimensional because your lines are going in two different directions. So again, you can see I'm really only making a mark going in one direction. I'm not scribbling my pen back and forth. This is super, super important. I can't emphasize it enough. Revisit your edges. Make sure that they're as dark as you can get them to with your marks. Okay, because this is what you'll be doing in your negative space drawing. You'll be choosing different methods of generating this value, this dark to light, and you'll be applying it within those negative spaces. So when we meet again, whether it's Wednesday or Thursday, you'll start in on this. So you want to try to have this done by the end of the period. Hopefully you're doing it with me. You're probably not going to finish each circle in the time period that I'm sitting here kind of talking at you, but you'll have time after this video ends to jump back into all the different circles and see how they came out. And then my finished example is going to be up on the board. So all of your circles should be filled in, right? You should have that transition happening in all of your circles. They should be completed. So if you don't finish it in the class time, you can't take it home because you can't take my pens home with you. Please don't take my pens out of the classroom. You'll have to come in outside of class, whether it's in the morning or during lunch, during your study hall or your IRT, because you need to have these finished before you start in on your project. Okay, so you can sort of see how my edges have have worked their way into a nice dark value. Just going to add a little more. And then there's my cross hatching. So that's perfect. My cross hatching would be considered a finished circle. Okay, so scumbling is very similar to scribbling, but it's more of like a controlled scribbling. So you're not just flinging your hand back and forth and making, these messy marks. It's a very controlled and kind of organized scribble. So you can see I'm sort of just moving my pen around. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can just see the mark that I'm making a little bit better. Okay, so sort of like just wiggling your pen around. I kind of do this 8 and like a figure 8 sort of mark where my pen just kind of wiggles back and forth. You'll get into like a pattern of your own sort of scumbling. But again, it's not a messy kind of scribble. So you can see around the edges, it's a smaller mark. And then as you work your way towards the center, those haphazard kind of scribbles become bigger to open up and let more of the white paper show. So I'm just going to kind of visit along my edge a little bit to make that edge dark. And then as I just kind of continue to layer, everywhere my pen makes a mark, it hides more and more of that white, so that area begins to look darker and darker. So, I mean, that happens with all of these techniques, but scumbling is kind of fun because you never really pick up your pen unless you're just readjusting it in your hand. And you kind of see this organic growth of value with a dark edge and a lighter center. So give this a shot. See what kind of mark works best for you. Figure 8, kind of repeated figure 8s work pretty well for people. You can see all my scribbles they have sort of like rounded edges. They're not straight lines. They're not straight back and forth scribbles. And they all kind of lay on top of each other very nicely, so there's no distinct mark that can be found. Again, nothing like this. You're not just doing that like messy up and down kind of scribbling. It's sort of just a really fluid kind of movement with your pen. Okay, so you can see that value building. So take the next 60 seconds or so and see if you can build that up. Visit my edge a little more, make it a little bit darker. Something you can do with scumbling that you can't really do with the other ones is you could actually take your pen and color that edge a little bit. And you're not really going to notice that you've colored the edges because there's no controlled, organized way that you're making your marks. If I were to go into the linear or the cross hatching and color along my edge like I'm doing right here, that would be very noticeable because it is in no way similar to the marks that I made on those 2 circles. But in scumbling, you don't see it because all of the different marks are going in all directions. So see there, it would contrast that. Okay, here you can just sort of darken up that edge. I'm just going to pull it around, bring it a little bit further over so I don't have as much white inside of that circle. Again, if I look at it from a distance or hold it out at arm's length and squint at it, you can see if that transition is nice and smooth. Down here looks a little funny. It looks really dark and then pretty light. A little bit too quick of a jump, so I'm going to add some more marks in there. You're never really finished. You can always kind of improve. So I could continue to sit here and kind of add more and more marks with my scumbling, especially because it's my favorite. So I really love building up this value. Okay, so there's linear, cross hatching, scumbling, all over the place. And then we kind of go to stippling, right? So stippling is the one where you sort of need the most patience. It's the slowest process, but it can be truly beautiful if you are patient enough to execute it across your entire circle. Stippling is also where students kind of get out of hand with the tapping of the pen because it's just a series of small dots and they start kind of just slamming the pen into the paper. So don't do that because again, it will destroy the pen. It's a really kind of slow and patient process. I'm really only picking my pen up maybe a quarter of an inch off the paper. So I'm going to start with all these little dots. Again, much more frequent around my outer edge. And then as I work my way in towards the middle, they become more spaced out. Okay, so you'll see that that value naturally transition from a dark edge into a nice light center. So if stippling is something that you're going to want to execute on your negative space design project, your negative space drawing, you're probably going to have to take your project home with you. And in which case I would send you home with a marker at that point because you will need more time. Your patience and hard work would definitely be acknowledged. In no way do you have to do stippling, but it does come out really, really nice if it's something that you really enjoy doing and you have the patience for it. Just takes a little while. It takes a little while to build up all those dots. It is also one of the harder ones to kind of make a mistake on because it does take so long to build up the value. So if you're kind of worried about keeping control over your marks because you think you get too dark too fast, stippling might be good for you because it takes such a long time to get that dark edge to transition into that nice light center. But just like with any of them, if you go too far, if you take it too dark too fast, you can't go back, right? So any of them and all of them, you're going to have to pay attention. Stippling, you just have a little bit more time to catch yourself if you think that you can't keep control. Okay, so work with your pen now. Please don't slam it down into your table, onto your paper. Just a nice slow buildup of dots. Pay attention to your edge. Make sure you try to bring that absolute dark black edge out. Similar to cross-hatching and linear, you can't color your edge. You can't go in and kind of trace out your edge to help it blend out like we did on Scumbling because you'll see that solid straight line. Okay, so you have to build it up with the dots. Some of these might sound familiar to you from middle school or from a class with Miss P or Miss Evans, in which case that's awesome because then you're just that much more familiar. If someone around you is confused but you get it, try to help them. Explain to them like what's going on. I'll be back on Wednesday, or maybe I don't see you until Thursday. Your classes are different, but we'll kind of review this quickly together. Okay, so those are your main four, like those consistent 4 ways that we can build up value. The last one, your surprise, is where you can kind of choose whatever mark you want. All of these methods are the same, right? It's just a different mark, but those marks are being repeated and layered to build up a darker edge. Okay, so in your surprise, you can choose the mark, the kind of mark that you would want to make. So in some classes, we tried it with like the letter H, which I'll draw in a second. Some of them we did a heart, but it's the same thing. You know, you just need to have it more frequent along the edge to give yourself a dark edge, and then it kind of spaces out as it works towards that lighter area. So again, we did an H. In some classes, we did kind of like an X shape. We did a star, we did a heart. Some classes we kind of practiced with a little circle or an O. Okay, so whatever mark you choose, it's up to you. This is where you kind of get to do your own creative thing. I'm gonna start with the H because I think that it looks kind of cool, and my name starts with Harmony, or my name is Harmony, so it starts with an H. So I'm just gonna zoom in so you can see my marks a little better. So if I start with that H, I'm going to start making a whole bunch of little H's along my edge, right? They're all right next to each other. I can layer them. They can sit on top of each other, that's fine. So pretty close together, very frequent along my edge to give me that darker value. And then as I move out towards the center, they're going to become a little bit bigger, so that way more white paper shows. Okay, and I get some of that visual blending, that transition of value. Right, so I'll do some even tinier ones. around here, layer them on top of each other. Your hand kind of gets confused when you do this many H's this fast. So maybe choose a letter that you'd want to do and see how that works out for you. Or you could choose something else. I'll do examples of other things too in just a second. So I'm just layering those marks, that repeated mark. My edge doesn't look very dark, so I'm going to put tiny, tiny little H's along my edge to fill in some of that lighter space. It doesn't look like I'm making H's right now, but I am. I'm making little itty bitty ones. So that way my edge gets darker and I can achieve that value. Okay, maybe, again, if you hold it out at arm's length, you can double check yourself to see if you have that value transition. If I did the little circles, similar idea, really, really small and frequent along the edge, and then as they work their way towards the middle, they would become, slowly they would become a little bit bigger. And then I can go in when I kind of finish out this base row, I guess you could call it, this base layer, to start kind of layering O's or circles on top of each other to intensify the value and make the transition smoother. So there's some O's, circles, working their way out. And I'll try one more. I'll do little stars. So tiny little stars along my edges. This one might look a little bit similar to Scumbling, but all of my stars are going in the same direction. So I have this continuity in my marks, like all the edges of my stars are all going the same way. So it looks a little bit more controlled than the Scumbling. Okay, so you don't have to do these ones specifically. You can choose your own mark. Maybe kind of play with a symbol or a different letter. Some kind of mark that your hand can kind of comfortably repeat, so that way you can layer them and see a transition with that mark. Just gonna focus us. There we go. Okay, so you should be able to finish all 5 of these by the end of the period. So you have 5 completed circles. Maybe with stippling, if you can get like a quarter or a half of the circle, that's fine, because I know stippling would take a very long time. So you certainly don't have to do all of stippling. But you can see, even if I go back into cross-hatching, I can kind of revise it. So take this time now to go back into all of those circles, because I sort of, hopefully you jumped to each one with me as we started a new technique. My Scumbling, like that's an example that could be considered finished at this point. Your lighter area doesn't necessarily have to be in the middle, but when you do your negative space drawing, it will be in the middle. But as long as I can see that you know how to generate that transition with your marks, that's fine. You can see my finished one up on the board. So if you need something to kind of compare to, the one that's hanging clipped up on the board is the one from this video. Okay, so just you can sort of see what it looks like. If you finish this, you can go back into working on your negative space drawing. If you didn't finish all of those spaces, just grab a drawing board and grab the materials off the table next to my desk, okay, and finish that out. If you're done with both of those things before the end of the period, you're more than welcome to pull out your folder and work on your folder for the rest of the period. Make sure you put my micron pens back. Please don't take them with you. They're pretty expensive. We don't want to lose them. And I think that's it. Hold on to your stuff for next class, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.